Good evening, everyone. My name is Josef Sorett. I'm professor of religion and African American Diaspora Studies at Columbia University. I want to welcome you and thank you for attending this second event in our summer-long series, Religion and the History of Black Music, from the rise of gospel to the reign of hip hop. Tonight is our second in a series of a six-part series of discussions that follows the history of Black music from the rise of the gospel blues in the wake of the Great Migration up through the present day hip hop music and so much more. Now, it's my pleasure, my privilege, my honor to welcome and introduce our guest expert, my interlocutor, conversation partner, scholar and professor, Fredara Hadley. Professor Hadley is an ethnomusicologist and professor in the music history department at the Juilliard School, just down the way, a couple blocks south of Columbia's campus. Although we're all connected via Zoom these days, increasingly we'll be able to see each other in person. At Juilliard, she teaches courses on ethnomusicology and African American music. Dr. Hadley has presented her research at universities and conferences, both domestic and abroad, and has been published in academic journals and other publications. Her commentary most recently has been featured in several documentaries, including this February in the PBS doc series, The Black Church, hosted by Professor Henry Louis Gates. I would jokingly say you were featured properly in the discussion during the migration area. I'm proud to say I was there for 7 seconds. Not that I'm salty or keeping track of time, but you received a proper feature there. Dr. Hadley's ongoing research project focuses on the musical impact of historically Black colleges and universities and on Shirley Graham Du Bois, one of the earliest Black women musicologists and opera composers. Fredara, I just want to say how great it is to reconnect here in the Zoom space. We met once before, pre-pandemic, Midtown in the studios of Sirius XM Radio. I think we were back-to-back commentators on a special episode of the Mike News Show. Shout out to Mike, who was hosting that day, Kirk Franklin, if I recall correctly. So it's a pleasure to reconnect here. Thank you for joining. To move right into the conversation, and we'll get to the music. I know folks want to hear the music and want to hear your thoughts on the music. But I'd love to just give you a chance to tell us a little bit more about your own research, whether on HBCUs or on this particular exemplary individual within the tradition of musicology, Shirley Graham Du Bois. Welcome, Professor Hadley. Please tell us a little more about what you've been working on these days.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here with you. And like we were passing, like you were coming, you were leaving and I was coming in, and you told me then, you were like, I'm gonna be in touch. And so here we are. So I'm super excited to be here this evening. My book project is really, and it dovetails with what we're talking about here tonight with gospel music, even my interest in historically Black colleges and universities, seeing them as really important sites of both Black music making and world making that don't exist in any other kind of way. And gospel music is a central part of how that happens on these campuses. And, you know, the importance of the gospel choirs, the importance of gospel music in university ceremony, and sometimes even in marching band repertoire, right? HBCUs are really fascinating. I'm an alumna of two of them. I graduated from undergrad from Florida A&M University and did a master's in African American Studies at Clark Atlanta University. But precisely because all of these musical trends we find kind of incubating on these campuses in ways that haven't been really studied in a robust and intentional kind of way. Pop culture has done a far better job at chronicling that these sites of music making in films like School Days, or whether you're talking about A Different World and things like that. And so I'm trying to bring some parity on the academic side to how we think about these institutions. And then Shirley Graham Du Bois, who taught at Howard University, also taught at Morgan State University and Tennessee State University. There are some through lines there with her as well. I really came to her while I was teaching at Oberlin Conservatory, which is her alma mater. And, it was just a revelation to me to realize that she staged an opera in 1932, Tom Tom, premiered to 25,000 people. And this isn't at the heart of how we talk about music history or even, Black music traditions. And so, I was excited to kind of get in there and think about her both as a pioneering musicologist, composer, who is very interested from the beginning in sort of like Pan-Africanist ideals, both uppercase Pan-Africanist and lowercase Pan-Africanism, trying to put that together. And interestingly enough, I'm headed to Ghana tonight, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, where she and W.B. Du Bois are interred, and obviously they became citizens and all of that. And so there are interesting intersections between these different ideas and gospel. I grew up in a Baptist church. My father, grandfather, both Baptist deacons. My grandmother was a Baptist minister, ordained, Reverend Mary L. Shannon, ordained minister. And so I'm always excited to talk about gospel music, both as an ethnomusicologist and scholar, and as ethnomusicologist Melanie Burnham would say, a tradition bearer, someone who has sung these songs and heard these songs most of my life.
Absolutely. Wow. Thank you so much for that rich context. It's great to hear about the institutional connections. My own grandmother spent 1 year at FAMU. Before it was FAMU, it was FAMC at the time. Absolutely. And she grew up in Jacksonville, went to Edward Waters High School, and then on to FAMC for a year. So it's great to hear about the institutional connections, as well as, we often talk about the relationship between art and politics, but to think in really nuanced ways about the sort of aesthetic developments in the context of institutions like HBCU, so powerful. And then also to hear about Shirley Graham Du Bois. There's a way in which, as I think about this series, right, from gospel to hip hop, conjures up a very familiar image of Black music, but it's not the totality of the kind of musical creativity that represents the Black repertoire, the way in which Black music feed into and grow with other traditions. So exciting to hear stories about this composer and writer of operas, right? So this is, I look forward to, both books or one book coming together?
So one before the other. The HBCU book is coming first. And with Shirley, she lives such a beautiful and large and incredible life. I need to go learn some more before I can properly say something intelligent about her. And the other thing about her too that I'm always mindful of, because a lot of times I'll mention her and people will think or assume that she was unknown in her lifetime. And she absolutely wasn't. She was incredibly well-known, well-connected. And so I'm excited to be one of the people. And thankfully, there's a groundswell of interest in her right now. And so one of the people trying to find my little piece of something to say. And shout out to Gerald Horn, who wrote an excellent biography of her. So that frees us up to not have to do that work, but be able to do deep dives on the many, many lives of Shirley Graham Du Bois. Absolutely.
Excellent. And thank you, of course, for fitting this in before you get on that flight. This is it's great to be able to say that again. That's right.
It is.
So let me ask, it is, right? Let me ask two quick questions to set up the song. The first is a general one that really actually comes up out of a term. It's not a term that will be unfamiliar to you, but it's something my students were wrestling with this and trying to find a language to think about gospel music as Black, gospel music as religious, as maybe Christian or something more, or what the relationship is with between religion and race as it relates to gospel music. And the term that has stuck with them throughout this 6-week summer term has been flavor, right? And they're trying to account for a flavor, a feel to the music. And I'd love to just hear you say something about how you would think about, or what would be the language you would use to describe the sort of flavor of this particular moment of roughly the 30s through the 1930, 1970 gospel music. What are some of the things we should think about to capture the historical, cultural, musical flavor of the music at this moment?
That's a really great question. And my first thought is that gospel in the 1930s to the 1970s, we're not even, obviously not even 100 years out of enslavement, if you're talking about the 1930s, right? And Black people, you can certainly make this case even in 2021, but certainly in 1930s, are going through that existential work of who are we sans that identification as enslaved people, but still reckoning with the very real effects of Jim Crow and on the move. And now, you know, all of these, the internal migrations, and some of us are going to college and some of us are getting, you know, like all of these questions and, you know, couched around ideas of racial uplift, which is very much about who we are to be to ourselves and in this country, right? And survivorship. And so I think if broadly, gospel music then reflects that, both in terms of, because one of the things that happens, and I was mindful of this as I picked the songs, all of the songs I picked can be considered gospel, but several of them come from various sources, right? There are a couple of songs that are Negro spirituals, meaning that they are songs created by enslaved people, right? Then there's a hymn, right, that is being sung in a gospel style, and then there is there's kind of like a blues song that is composed and written as well. And I point all of that out to say that if we're thinking about gospel, it can be in any genre, actually, right? You can have a gospelized delivery of a song that we might read as classical in its sort of home genre orientation, right? And I think it's helpful to think about what the music is designed to do, which is consistent with the principles of African and Black American music making. The musicologist Ollie Wilson talks and writes very well about this, not a trait list, but sort of tendencies of things that are important in how Black people make music. And so, you know, everything that we think of, the call and response, the percussive timbres, all of that serves to either both soothe and embolden senses of community, gospel meaning, and you know this from the first 4 books of the New Testament, good news, ideas of upliftment, not so much in a socio-cultural sense, but in a spiritual, individual kind of way. And so when we're thinking about why the music sounds the way that it does, it's because no matter what canon is drawing from, it always is seeking to do that. So that would be my kind of roundabout.
That's a wonderful answer. And actually, I feel like you started to answer my second question before we jumped into the music, right? Was that you've come up with these and you've started to explain the different songs you've selected. What I wanted to ask was, how did you arrive at these 5? Like, what were the kinds of things you were thinking about? Was there a song that was really tough not to put on this list? Obviously, 5 songs is an impossible enterprise, but you did it. And so I'd love to just hear a little bit about that.
Sure. So I was really thinking about vocal groups. For some reason, I really wanted to lean into that a little bit. And so that narrowed it down. Unfortunately, that meant no Mahalia Jackson. But I've always been really, my grandfather would sometimes sing tenor and gospel quartets in Tampa, Florida. So that is still kind of in my DNA as well. But that's one of my favorite types of gospel to listen to, because I think there's so much creativity in the harmonies, and it directly reflects ideas of community and communal music making. You literally hear it in what people are doing. So there was that idea. And I also was just thinking about migration. And so all except one of the artists that I picked aren't based in the South. Right?
Yep. But they may still be of the South, right?
They are definitely of the South, but you know, come to the world, and their identification comes from outside of the South, which says something really important about the era that we're in, right? And I was also thinking about, in this time period, the gospel music. Well, let me say this first. I was thinking a little bit about denominational affiliations too, because we talk about gospel broadly and without always paying attention to Church of God in Christ or Baptist. And that can give us shades of meaning in terms of why the music sounds the way it does or what the song choices were and things like that. So I was thinking about that. And I was, and to get to this sort of gospel music canon that emerges and how I come to learn and know these songs when I'm growing up in the 1980s. And there were certain songs that I wanted to talk about, like Precious Memories. Well, I'm giving it away, but there are songs that I wanted to talk about. And then I wanted to find performances that I thought added to the conversations about these songs in some meaningful way.
Absolutely. All right. Excellent. And that was a foreshadowing, not a giving it away.
That's right. All right.